Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2, Quick Match gameplay. And this time around we are going back to the drawing board with the Empire versus Dwarf matchup. As I'm sure some of you have been watching me since Warhammer 1 know, one of the very powerful builds against Dwarves was actually due to almost all handgunners. You'd run a pair of captains, Lord of Life Wizard and Boris on a Griffin, and just kind of run a horde of handguns, and then gun the Dwarf down because the Dwarf couldn't really do comp to counter you with. Now in Warhammer 1, or Warhammer 2 with Mortal Empires, there's actually been quite a bit of an effort, I think, to reduce the amount of cheese and various types that used to go on. And so now you're limited to maximum of 6 units of handguns or of any infantry. In the case of a few elite units, you're limited to 3, and of course heroes are down to 2 instead of the previous 3. So I definitely think there's been some, and I think these are good changes. But I wanted to give a shot to that good old-fashioned anti-dwarf build with a horde of shooting and just see how it would go. Trying it out one more time. Now I did have to, of course, make some changes because I can't field the 12 or 13 or whatever it was handguns again. What I did decide to do was I ran Karl Franz, and I actually didn't run him on a mount and on a Griffin. You might be wondering why that is, but it's actually because with the dwarves getting a whole bunch of snares now, trying to land could become incredibly risky, and I'd rather just have Karl kind of hiding in the back, surviving thanks to 120 armor, and whomping on people with good old Gall Miraz. Now, and that is actually why I did bring Karl rather than the general, for example, because he does have armor piercing, which will still mean that he can still duel fairly effectively against, say, a Dwarven Lord or or Thorgrim or something like that. For my alongside him, I did bring an Empire Captain, stripped down to basically nothing. He is, of course, just there to stiffen up the front line, tank some enemy fire, and slug it out with my opponent's infantry. And I did bring a Jade Wizard with Earthblood and Regrowth, just to provide heals for my front line. And I did bring a front line here. 4 units of Great Swords, and in the back I do have a single unit of Spearmen, Veteran up to 3, just to spend some of my points. These points could have perhaps been invested in Gall Miraz and Reichland Runefang, but I decided against it. In retrospect, I'm not sure this is the right choice, but it was what I decided at the time. I just wanted a little bit more meat on my front line. For my back line, of course, we're going handgunner heavy, so I'm running 6 units of handguns. On one flank, I'm running the Silver Bullets, and on the other, I'm running the Sterling's Revenge, which is hidden out here in the woods. These guys do, of course, have stocks, so they're actually hidden even when they do leave the woods. But I didn't want to overextend just in case my opponent was doing some sort of Vanguard cheese. You can see the first catapult shots are going in and hitting my handgunners over there. My opponent has done a very sort of elite, but pretty, I think, in many ways, conventional Dwarven army. For his Lord, he did bring a simple Dwarf Lord, nothing too fancy, coming in with the usual Stand Your Ground, Foe Seeker, and of course Banner of Lost Hold, which is a great AoE melee attack and weapon strength buff, which will sync very, very nicely with this mob of hammers. And hammers do, of course, have gotten buffed a huge amount. They're much cheaper now, and they will absolutely crush great swords in a one-to-one fight. You see the catapult fire is still coming in, messing up my handgunners. You can see my Sterling's Revenge has been spotted, so I'm going to retreat. Alongside them, my opponent has brought Iron Drakes, which has been an interesting choice, but they could potentially burn down some of my lighter infantry pretty effectively. 2 units of Longbeards on the flanks, some Dwarf Warriors with Great Weapons in the back, some Miners with Satchel Charges, Iron Breakers in the center, anchoring the line. And then a bit of an interesting kind of shooting comp. 2 units of Rangers, which are of course cheap and can provide good fire. Quarrels with Great Weapons, which is a bit interesting, but of course in the Dwarf versus Empire matchup, one of the most common builds, and I should probably mention this, is running a lot of Great Swords, backed by perhaps a handful of cavalry like say Demigryphs or Knights. And against that, Great Weapons are actually not a bad idea. So you actually will want some armor piercing. It's not... Empire will generally not do a mass shooting building because they cannot trade. Their shooting units cannot trade one-to-one. Then my opponent does have a unit of Gyrocopters with Brimstone guns over there, who are, of course, there just to snipe down any large units that I might bring, poke at my Lord, that sort of stuff. You can see my handguns are just unloading on these poor Iron Drakes. They will get a burst of fire here on the Empire Captain, but he has a lot of armor. He has decent morale. He's not just going to break. And these poor Iron Drakes are going to have a very bad time of it as these handgunners just open fire on them. And you can see these hammers, which were hidden behind, have already taken a lot of hurt. My opponent does push out with the Gyrocopters with Brimstone guns, trying to get a bombing run on the Sterling's Revenge, but I see it coming, and I actually micro my Sterling's Revenge forward. Do take a few casualties. I think I actually took those from cannon fire earlier, and you can see I actually juke all of the bombs, and I'm actually going to be able to gun these poor guys down. The Brimstone guns really cannot trade against Sterling's Revenge. My greatswords are pushing in. You can see the captain, who I did push in earlier on, has been hit with a regrowth, just trying to keep him alive. I am focusing down my opponent's Iron Drakes with the handgun fire, and now I'm just kind of trying to push in with the greatswords, slug it out with the Longbeard, and just kind of grind him under. The silver bullets are kind of wailing on the miners with blasting charges, trying to whittle them down. It's very hard to see the projectiles because, of course, this is a snowy map. And unfortunately, I'm getting a bit of a clumped up concave here. And generally, you want to spread out your troops if you at all can. You can see, in spite of the fact that he's pretty high on HP thanks to regrowth, my poor Empire Captain is routing off. I do push Carl fairly far up. You see these hammers are already really low. They're being focused down by the handgun fire, and they're really not having the best time of it. I'm pushing my spears forward now, just trying to soak up and tie down this front line. Carl does charge in, and we get a rout on the hammers. And you can see my opponent's hammers have traded incredibly efficiently with the greatswords, and causing 25 casualties and taking very little damage in return. Unfortunately for my opponent, my Sterling's Revenge, which is actually a very quick infantry unit at 36 speed, is hoofing it around, and it's going to get into my opponent's backline and just start annihilating these Longbeards. First, they will finish off these hammers, but after that, these poor guys are going to go down like 9 pence. My Jade Wizard is here in the back. I haven't pushed him into the fray, which might be a bit of a mistake, but he is simply sitting around here, ready to kind of support. He is casting an Earthblood here, just trying to kind of get the maximum effect possible. And you can see my handgunners are now focusing on the Rangers. In spite of their shields, the Rangers are not going to have a good time. They have been focusing on just breaking my spearmen and breaking my melee troops, and they're definitely paying for it now as my handgunners just unload on them. And they're going to wipe these guys out very, very quickly. You can see these poor miners have been demolished by the silver bullets, and now the next unit of Rangers is on the menu. Of course, the Quarrelers are still firing, but Quarrelers are not particularly effective against greatswords. Definitely Thunders would have, for example, probably been better. You can see the Sterling's Revenge over here is just unloading on the backs of these Longbeards, and I'm actually pushing my Jade Wizard into the fray here, just trying to tie down these hammers and the Iron Breakers. Of course, he will not trade well with these guys at all. He might not even succeed in getting even a single kill, but he will tie them down. Carl Franz is turning around, just trying to get into these guys and tie them down as well and do some damage. And you can see I'm now able to kind of focus on this Lord as my captain breaks again for a second time. And you can see he's almost hit his healing cap, so regrowth isn't really going to be able to save him this time. However, greatswords are in there just to plug the gap. And of course, with the loss of potions of healing, the Lord is a lot less tanky than he was before. Carl is actually taking quite a bit of hurt. He's taking arrow fire from the Quarrelers, which does have 4 armor-piercing damage per shot, so it's actually not too weak. And of course, the hammers hit very, very hard, and in spite of the fact he's large and they're not anti-large, they're still going to tear through him very effectively. Fortunately, though, for my opponent, the Sterling's Revenge has just been unloading on him. Sterling's Revenge has a monstrous armor-piercing DPS, and they're just able to absolutely gut these guys. And you can see these guys are already up to 68 kills and still climbing. My handguns are pushing forward, leapfrogging forward. You can see as they are taking some nasty fire from these grudge throwers, but now they're focusing down with some nasty crossfire. This poor Lord is being stuck in, just focused down in the midst of these greatswords, and that's actually going to be game. So definitely, I think the Empire handgun line is still pretty viable. In retrospect, I should probably invest in Galmaraz and the Reichland Runefang for Carl, rather than investing in those spears. The reason for that being that when I pushed in with the greatswords, I could have gotten much more damage out of the greatswords. I ended up getting very little done with, I think, with the greatswords in comparison to what their potential was, simply because of that. I do think the Jade Wizard is still a better choice than an additional captain, just for the heals, helping you keep your troops alive. As you can see, my heroes didn't do much of the killing. Most of it did come down to greatswords. The spearmen didn't get anything done. That was how bad their matchup with the hammers was. And as you can see, the handguns did really well. Sterling's Revenge, 75 kills, Silver Bullet 72, and the rest of the handguns, of course, still doing good work. They were just able to annihilate those. And the thing is that any non-shielded Dwarven infantry unit is going to be incredibly susceptible to them. And anything that's shielded is not going to be too good against your greatswords. So it's basically a win-win situation for the Empire. One of the mistakes I definitely made was that I didn't focus out the Quarrelers with great weapons fast enough, and the other problem was that I didn't spread out my handgunners enough. The handgunners ended up overlapping, clumping, and blocking each other and not getting quite their full DPS out. And that was definitely a bit of a mistake on my part. But otherwise, I definitely think Empire shooting is still viable. Good game to my opponent, Lord JJ. It was definitely a lot of fun. If you're playing as dwarves, I think my recommendation is that you definitely invest a little more in shields for your front line, and perhaps bring a don't bother with Iron Drakes in my opinion against Empire, because they're either gonna they're probably gonna run great swords or heavy cav for their melee contingent, and getting to range of your opponent is going to be difficult against handguns. And I think that really brings some thunders, and rather than investing in great weapons against Empire, which are susceptible to really susceptible to shooting, I think it's generally better to just invest in a good old thunders backed by stiffened with the front line stiffened by longbeards. Nonetheless, good game to my opponent. It was a lot of fun doing this build. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe down below. Any comments, criticism, any questions about Total War Warhammer or anything of that sort, any suggestions for units or comps you'd like to see demonstrated, be sure to post them down in the comments and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.